the end of the century. And now we're anticipating that the Arctic Ocean will be ice-free in summer, at least, in the next 10 years. I mean, they're consistently underestimating the speed with which these things go. So the way, if the West Antarctic ice sheet goes completely, sea level will rise at least 12 feet. So we have, no matter how long it takes, we have bequeathed to the future a sea level rise well in excess of 12 feet, because sea level rise is occurring as we speak, even without the West Antarctic ice sheet, because the Greenland ice cap is going up. Mountain glaciers are going.
Let's get started. Yeah.
I brought some fresh organic cilantro from our garden. It's up there. If anyone wants to take some home, please don't make me take it home. I'm so help yourself. The other one is my partner, Paul Daughter, is a quilter, and she's doing a series of lectures in June here at the library every Wednesday evening, and I think it's 6:30. But she has a quilt display upstairs that is incredible to look at. It's in, I guess it's the big reading room with all the tables upstairs. If you like quilts at all, she has a lot of her own quilts and some of other people's quilts and creative quilts as well. It's a great display. The light is wonderful in there.
I have a couple of announcements. One is our book for next month is coming in. It is long, but it is really readable. It's a collection of stories. I started it and said, oh man, I want to read this book. It's good. Very interesting. To introduce Patrick, let me say that I met him last year here in this room, and after we talked for 5 minutes, I said, I want you. And he joined, and I am so happy. He's such an asset to the climate lobby, and one of the abilities that he brings is his passion for communication. And he's been studying Jonathan Haidt, and he gave a little presentation to the CCL about Jonathan Haidt's righteous mind, how to construct a dialogue with climate deniers. And it was so good, I said we have to do this for this other group. I would just like to mention, I can send this to you. I got this from the CCL. A recent pollster said that a recent poll on energy issues found 51% of Republicans now believe climate change is happening. And many legislators, congresspeople are trying to find ways to, I think, to address them, what issues to talk about in order to design a policy to deal with it. Because I think the science is in that most of us now accept that it's happening. It's just what are we going to do about it? So some of the issues that Republican voters favored included pushing to leave a clean air legacy, promoting health to reduce air pollution. So clean air, health, economy through renewable energy resources, and being responsible stewards of God's creation, and also the military's acceptance of global warming. And I know after talking to Mike Masterson so many times about climate, and he kept saying, no, it's not happening, I don't believe it, and then he wrote this incredible article in the paper about solar energy. So people are coming around. And Patrick, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes.
And thank you so much.
Masterson's article, that the solar energy, did he admit that climate change really is happening?
No, but
or he just talked about solar?
he was just saying, no, in case there is that we go to
Well, the fact that 51% of Republicans now acknowledge that climate change is happening just means that there are 49% of Republicans that are dumb.
No, but this is good lobbying. It's good lobbying. I mean, if you want to write to your Republican members of Congress, you mentioned that now 51% of Republicans are doing this, are believing in climate change, and you also mentioned health, renewable energy sources as a benefit for the economy, clean air, and Patrick will tell us regulation that are conservative college.
Well, 90% of the
Look at on
the population supports comprehensive background checks before you buy a gun, and it still hasn't managed to pass Congress. So I don't know if 51% is gonna.
It's better than it was.
Okay, well, so again, my name's Patrick Kinman. I've been with CCL now for, I guess, about a year, so. My background as far as my interest in climate change goes is I moved to Northwest Arkansas about 3 years ago now, and longer than that, I guess. Started working with Walmart, as a packaging engineer for Sam's Club, and started sort of understanding at that point, I guess, just the sheer volume of things that we produce in the United States. It sort of made it really easy to bring to light kind of the impact that we can have, right? When you're talking about, we would try to find ways to cut 4% packaging out of a box for just any given item. I remember seeing numbers like, oh, well, that ended up saving 750 trees from being cut down, or converting plastic savings of 1 and 2% of the yogurt cup to units of Nimitz-class aircraft carriers in total weight. And these were just, normal discussions we had every day, and ways that we had to actually put units into measurements that people could, wrap their minds around it. So that, along with trips to the Orient multiple times and seeing what's happening there, it just sort of became very apparent that this is something that we really focus on. I need to personally focus on. So the topic for today is really not about what's happening, but how do we communicate it. Like Shelley said, 51% of conservatives now agree or admit that it's occurring, but how do we get the others to come on board? So I found Jonathan Haidt a little while ago. He's actually presented at one of the CCL call-ins. Fantastic guy, clinical psychologist. But anyway, starting off, we've got some of these conservative mantras that I just want to get air out there that we've seen before. That we've seen 100 times. No matter how worthy the cause is, to confiscate the property of one person and give it to another to whom it does not belong. The best way to help your neighbors is not to live off your neighbors, right? Makes sense, you just don't think about it. Don't expect to build up a belief by pulling down the strong. Intuitively logical kind of things. Republicans believe every day is 4th of July, Democrats believe every day is April 15th. I just want to sort of air some of these out real quick because I know this is what we're all thinking, right? When we think about conservatives and sort of climate denial along with plenty of other issues. This one, of course, was interesting. A woman who demands for the gun control legislation is like a chicken to roost for Colonel Sanders. Again, makes sense when you don't think about it, right? So Haidt has a very great way of dealing with these. And he says, understanding the simple fact that morality differs around the world, and even within society, the first step is understanding your and my righteous mind. That's very important. So what we'll do today, we'll go to the purpose, who Haidt is, bio, accolades, a summary of the righteous mind, applications in climate change. He doesn't really speak to climate change specifically, he just talks sort of about the differences between liberals and conservatives. And then we'll do case examples and questions. So, our end game here. What do we want to gain from this? First off is reduce personal anxiety over the so-called blindness of others. We all did that, right? 2012 election. Learn to speak the language of conservative values, right? It's not enough to know the facts. We have to be able to speak it in a way that is understood by our audience. And apply those values to climate change. And really what I'm trying to get across is that do we want to, vent and air out a dirty laundry, or do we want to actually make people listen to what we're saying? If we want to get on Yahoo control, we can do that. But if we really want to actually make a change and make a difference in people's minds, we have to watch how we present. And really a question that's going to rise is, do we want to be more approachable or knowledgeable? And what Jonathan Haidt is going to prove is that one is actually more important. So Haidt, and I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Haidt. That's how I've heard him say it on some of his videos. He's author of The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. He's a social psychologist, so this isn't something that he's pulling out of the air. This is based on the most up-to-date neuroscience social psychology studies that we have available. Thomas Schooley, Professor of Ethical Leadership at NYU. TED Talk with 3 million views. If you haven't watched it, it's a great summary of all this. Fantastic. His most popular one was made right before he wrote this book, so he's still sort of developing some of the thoughts within the book, but definitely the core message. And he's definitely, right now, extensively referred to within the field. Sam Harris, Frank the Wall, and many others refer to him in some of the great work that he's done. So he breaks the book up into 3 parts: fundamentals, foundations of morality, sort of sets the stage on why you should sort of understand or agree with what he's saying. He lays out the, I guess I would call it like our biological framework, and then how we fill in the gaps there to create a moral structure. Part 2 is sort of how we modify our moral structure through interactions with other people. And then there's the left and right. And then part 3 is sort of the political debate, how we can understand what the points of the left are doing, what the right is doing, and the strengths and weaknesses of both. So the real thesis, morality binds groups together and creates sort of in-group loyalty and blindness to the opinions of others.
Did you have a question?
No.
Oh.
No, just running forward.
Do you mind if we ask questions?
Absolutely. I wanted to see more of the dialogue than just the presentation.
What was Sam Harris interested in this? I only know his book, Against Religion, whatever it's called.
Yeah, so Sam Harris has a point of contention around the way that Haidt breaks up sort of what he calls moral pillars, and we'll get into that in a little bit. So Harris, or Haidt says there's like 6 moral pillars that we all rely on to create our moral framework, and Harris would say we only have 1 or 2. The others sort of fall in line with the other 2. So purpose, create awareness and understanding of different moral positions. That's for him. We're going to synthesize this and apply it to climate change and take it a little bit of a step further. So part 1, the moral framework. So Haidt says the brain is a book, the first draft of which is written by the genes during field development. It's sort of our biological predisposition. And this is that argument between nature versus nurture. And I'm not particularly familiar with the details of it, but Haidt basically makes the argument that nurture has been the predominant theory for basically ever, up until the last 20 years, that we are a blank slate at birth and we fill in everything through what we learn and through our experiences. Haidt makes the argument that that's not the case, that we are actually born with inherited genes that sort of determine some of our traits from birth. And then our experiences revise this draft. So he proves this through multiple different studies. One of them, which is really interesting, is to study twins from birth all the way through adulthood and how their morality shifts and change and how they're very close and similar at the beginning. And he does a great job of explaining how, again, biology sort of sets the framework and we fill in the rest. So the implications of this, or the implication of this, is that morality is not a matter of reason. And that's one of the first things, the most important things we need to remember in all this. Is that when somebody makes a moral statement, or even a moral truth, we have to understand that it's not necessarily just, we're not looking at things the same way, through the same lens that they are. So he uses, this study I thought was really interesting, he uses what he calls a moral dumbfounding study. So he sets up these incredible questions of sort of, what is your moral response to this? So one of the ones he uses is the family and the beloved pet. So a family has a dog that they love forever, and the dog is run over in the street in front of the family and dies right there. The family decides that they've always wanted to know what dog tastes like. So they cut the dog up and they cook it and they eat it. So exactly, that's our initial response, right? So then Haidt asks, well, so what is that right or wrong? And people say, well, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. And then he pursues. So why is that wrong? Well, it's not sanitary. Well, they cooked the dog just died. It didn't have rabies, didn't have anything. Well, it's not good to eat dog. It was unhealthy. There's nothing unhealthy about eating dog. So he presses you. And so what he finds is that we double down and get that right? So we go off our intuition, we go off our gut and initial reaction, and we don't take the time to reason through and come to understand, actually, maybe this was just me gut reacting to this kind of horror. What I see is, to me, personally, a problem. So what are the ramifications here? So basically what he argues is that intuition equal our decisions. All decisions are made at the intuitive, just instantaneous level, right? What does that make reasoning? Post hoc justification, right? And that's about it. So he says, moral arguments are mostly post hoc constructions crafted to advance strategic objectives. So that's got like sort of a double implication, right? So reasoning is just a post hoc justification, and whether wittingly or unwittingly, it's crafted to advance strategic objectives. So I could unwittingly be saying something just because I don't like the fact that your moral question about this dog is challenging my moral structure, right?
That post hoc construction is mostly unconscious, right?
Mostly, I'm sorry.
Mostly unconscious?
It's usually going to be, he would say, I would definitely agree, usually an unconscious decision.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Which means you can point it out to people they won't believe it.
Exactly. That makes it challenging.
If somebody realizes that there are many societies where they actually do, I mean, on a regular basis, does that influence how they approach?
Sure. So there are people who approach that, who respond to that question, like many of us in this room probably would say, well, I don't think it's right, but it's not my place to judge. I'm sure there are places where they do eat dog. So what he does is he creates increasingly difficult questions to answer. And I won't get into all of them. Some of them are dicey, but they would challenge any of those. Yeah.
I've never eaten dog and I wouldn't want to, and I wouldn't do what was suggested there, but I instantly thought, as soon as you gave us the example, that's okay, there's nothing going on.
Right.
I just wouldn't do it myself, I think there's absolutely nothing wrong.
So
Does he indicate that everybody makes these moral arguments, or does he admit that there are maybe 5 or 10% of people who don't think that way?
You and 2 others.
So,
Got a reason through them.
he does. He basically makes the assertion that we all do this the exact same way. That laws that. So it's. I think some of what we'll get into shortly will show that a little bit why that is the case and why I can see where you're going with it. But and I don't remember exactly why, but he does a very good job of proving this is sort of we all do it, no matter what the issue.
We all do it to some extent,
To
but
some
some to much more extent.
Correct, yeah, and we will absolutely get into that.
Like that, we
absolutely.
Yeah.
So he creates an analogy for this. This is a metaphor. He calls it the rider and the elephant. So basically, he says we all function as a rider on top of an elephant. The elephant being this intuitive decision maker who kind of lumbers along, makes all the decisions. The rider's just sort of there along, like we said, along for the ride, creating the justifications as the elephant goes and does its thing. It's a pretty neat little way to think about it, and you start thinking other people pretty quickly.
Just hanging on.
Yeah, exactly. He's got some serious problems going on there. All right, so the first learning we take from this, speak to the elephant, right? Don't try to speak to the rider. If you're going to do that, you're not going to get anywhere, right? Think of Fox News, right? What are they good at? They're reporting the fact, being fair and balanced. You got to say the truth. Exactly, but they're very good at pulling on your heartstrings, right? They are great at it, and that's why they're so successful, or I would say good part. So part 2, he talks about our moral powers, okay? And he did a study on this, and across several different countries, and found that in his opinion, and again Sam Harrison disagrees, human morality is constructed of 6 pillars. Predominant of which is sort of care and harm, so how you feel about empathy towards someone, the care that you have for people, the hurt you feel when somebody is harmed. Number 2, closely followed after care and harm, is fairness versus cheating. You know, a type of injustice that you feel when that comes up. Then, not quite as high up there is loyalty and betrayal, with authority, subversion, liberty, oppression, and then sanctity. And he says that across the entire globe, we all exist on a moral framework that is made up of these 6 pillars.
Can you tell me what Harris would say when you make that?
So Harris argues that loyalty 3 through 6 are all basically portions of care and fairness. So you can say loyalty versus betrayal is a matter of fairness. It's only right that you're loyal to this person, right? But I think Height does a good job of breaking up, and I think it's a good point of doing it because it does sort of differentiate where the left and the right sort of exist in their moral thought process.
Yeah, the last two, very much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, the last three, very much on the lines of conservative. Maybe everybody, I don't know.
So we'll get into it. So liberals versus conservative balance. So based on this, who do you think has the broader moral palette? So Height doesn't know.
That was my intuitive.
Right? There you go. Should've gone with that. So conservatives are sort of the Baskin and Robbins of morality. Basically argues that liberals exist primarily on a two-pillar moral foundation. Now, we have the others in there, but to a much, much less degree than conservatives would. I shouldn't be saying we did. I should be pulling my CCL mouth here.
That would be the first two of those, maybe?
I'm sorry?
That would be the first two of your six.
Yes, exactly. The first two: care, harm, fairness, and cheating. And that conservatives have a very sort of even balance across all six pillars. So what are the consequences of this? So first off, conservatives speak to the elephant extremely well. They know how we feel, how people feel about loyalty, about betrayal, about sanctity, all those things, and they're able to speak to it in a sort of poetic way that really, again, pulls that elephant towards one direction. Liberals have an extreme difficulty in relating to conservatives. We often don't understand those arguments. Why would you make an argument for loyalty in the in matters of, or sanctity in matters of gay rights? Don't want to get into that one too big, but why would you make that sort of argument? But conversely, conservatives have a very easy time understanding where liberals come from because they understand the two pillars that we typically exist on. They can relate to it very easily, but they just speak to more. But the flip side of that is what we were talking about earlier about confabulating, right? So confabulation in those moral questions on the dog, and are there some people who do a better job of not trying to confabulate and double down on questions like that, or reason through the situations a little more? So conservatives have a real tough time with moral questions like that, and Height says because they will exist in such a broad moral landscape that it's really difficult to account for all those moral pillars, right? When you only have to account for two, it's really easy to kind of work through the problem. Oh, it's a moral problem from these 2 points, done. I can make a judgment call, or change my reasoning. But when you have to account for all these things, you kind of shut off. And that's what he says conservatives do. They confabulate more quickly, and they tend to confabulate.
I've never heard of it before.
Oh, really? So, confabulate means to fabricate something out of the air.
Okay.
With no justification, no reason for it whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
So they basically create situational simplification. They oversimplify the issue. The sun is like this furnace over here, and we're like a little light bulb. How are we going to change the climate like that? They oversimplify questions. So second learning, broaden the moral argument. If we really want to speak to the way conservatives think, broaden the moral argument. Okay, part 3, morality binds and blinds. This is sort of the real meat of it. So what he says is we are mostly selfish, but also strongly groupish as a species. He says we are 90% chimp and 10% bee. And what he means by this, we have what he calls a hive switch. So we're very selfish beings, but we also have this part of us that is very loyal, very groupish.
Is he referring to everybody or?
Everybody.
Okay,
He's
not
referring to everybody here. So it's things like being a fan of a sports team and absolutely, with your core, hating the other team, right? Or post 9/11, the amount of patriotism that we show. That's our team, right? So the third learning is avoid the high switch. If you don't want to activate that switch in somebody, so it's a double-edged sword, right? So you can activate a high switch in somebody's mind to get people on your team, but you can also activate the high switch in somebody else's mind by saying the wrong thing, right? If you go to a conservative and say you should support climate change because we need to save the polar bears or something like that, they immediately understand where you're coming from sort of a liberal standpoint. That switch is activated and sort of like it shut down. You kind of lost the argument at that point. You're not going to get anywhere. Some of the problems we have with climate change, though, how do you activate a high switch when you don't have something to rally around? You know, Osama bin Laden, that's a target, a team, that's somebody you're fighting against or fighting for, fighting with, right? Climate change doesn't really have that. It's really difficult to pinpoint things that people can rally around. It's a really tough thing for us to get into our town. I'm not saying you get to do this. Okay, so putting it to work. Up here I've got Dale Carnegie and Tom Big L Schreider, two writers who, they're both business writers. They, basically, it's sort of obvious because we use these principles in business on a day-to-day basis. When you're trying to, you know, woo a client, Dale Carnegie and Schreider, they both use these same principles of speaking to your audience, basically what Hike is saying. So anyway, set the stage by providing a mutually agreeable moral truth. So we want to avoid that high switch altogether when we're talking to somebody about climate change, right? So what can we say? We all want to build a life for our children that is better than what we have, right? Versus the people of Indonesia are going to have a terrible time, you know, based on what we're doing to them. If it's something that you're comfortable with or that you believe in, God placed man on this planet to tend and care for it. So again, set the stage in a way that you can appeal to anybody, right? If you can appeal to a conservative's moral palate, you can appeal to a liberal.
Some people get turned off by God talk.
Exactly.
Get turned off by it.
It's true. But if we're talking to conservatives generally, and you can gauge your audience.
Conservatives would not be mostly like that.
Right, right.
There are some.
So you just have to gauge your audience. Basically, no statistics until the bridge has been created, right? Speak to the elephant first, and then set the stage, right? All right, so let's do a little bit of practice. So what arguments or phrases might we use to appeal to the more conservative moral pillars? So what could you use for like loyalty versus betrayal? Duty, honor, right? Family, absolutely. Authority versus subversion, cheating our country or the leaders of the world, you know, set America as an example for the world. Authority of the U.S. Liberty versus oppression, obviously freedom, right or God-given right, protection.
You're not going to have much freedom in a destroyed world.
Exactly. Where are your freedoms there? We'll get some other versions of it as well. And sanctity, we can talk about.
Say more about that sanctity part. I don't get it.
Sanctity is the sixth pillar. What I'm trying to put this, so it's
So the notion that some things are sacred?
Oh, okay.
Sure,
Okay.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So how can we appeal to, yeah, exactly. Haidt makes the argument that liberals, while not